Hey friends! If you can't tell, I'm super excited to share this spiritual autobiography. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I'm super excited to share just a little bit of my story, and I hope that it encourages people, and I know that y'all's story will do the same. I want you to know that my paper is in front of me on my laptop, just because sometimes I can ramble. Decided to tell my story. I've chosen to do so in chapters, and you'll see that the chapters correlate to the age of my life. I hope that it all flows for you and that you can get the gist of how I've chosen to share my spiritual pilgrimage. So anywho, let's jump right in. I'm Tori. I am 25 and I'm as weird as I have ever been before. I know. I make terrible knock-knock jokes and I laugh at myself before I have a chance to finish them. I lie awake in bed some nights just wondering how tall Jesus was. Have you ever wondered if the light in the refrigerator really goes off when you close the door? When I visit churches, I intentionally sit on the outside pew, just in case things get a little weird, and I tip out the back. I cry when I'm filled with joy, and I have this overwhelming sense of peace when things seem to be crumbling down. And I've learned to draw on these crucial building blocks of my life. Everything about my life is exactly the way that God wants it to be, from my hair to my skin color to the family that I was born into, to my mistakes, my trying horrible attempts at trying to recreate my grandma's biscuits. Major fail. I don't want to talk about it. I'm over it. All of these life experiences so far is a part of the life that I've been blessed with. The good, the bad, the ugly, and enlightened recently to the idea that God works in seasons. And about 3 years ago, I started to name those seasons in correlation not only to my age, but to what I felt God was teaching me during that time. For example, chapter 23, when I turned 23, God spoke into my spirit, just be, meaning that you know who you are. There's no longer this sense of major identity crisis. We all have those little times when we're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on. But you know who I've called you to be. Just do it. Don't think about it. Just do it. Because if you think about it, you're going to talk yourself out of it. We both know how that works. And as often as I look at other people sometimes and I think, gosh, they have an amazing life, I sit back and at the end of the day, I trade my journey for this chapter, Growing Up Tori. I was born and raised on a dirt road in Wilcox County, Alabama, which in 2010 was deemed the fourth poorest county in the country. I never really fazed my brothers and I, because growing up, to us, we were as rich as can be. We always had the love of each other, and we always had the love of our parents. I grew up in a small Baptist church just off the dirt road. Grandfather was the pastor there, has been for the past 19 years of my life. And there wasn't a Sunday that my dad did not bang, 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 bang. Y'all wake up, we going to Sunday school. Like, there wasn't a Sunday that passed by that we didn't get to church. My fondest memories from Sunday school was my Sunday school teacher, Deborah, who also happened to be my cousin, because let's face it, small town, everybody's related. Everybody's your cousin. Next, our Sunday school class, she said, what is it that you want most out of life? And the answers range from, I want a nice house, nice car, nice things, to an endless supply of Skittles. All that. I told her, I just want to be happy with God. And it was sort of along those lines then that I realized how important church was. I realized that, you know what, maybe there's a method to my dad's madness about always having us at church. And those were the years that kind of formed a good bit of my 12 to 17. And I've titled this chapter, Oh, He's Really Real. This next part of my life transitioned me from spectator to a participator. And although I had grown up in church, I feel like I missed the most important aspect, which was a personal relationship. Baptized at 12, but I like to tell people it wasn't until I was 16 that I actually felt like I met the man that all these people sang about, that all these people prayed to. And it was a turning point in my life. This was the point that I realized that God doesn't just dictate our lives from the sky, but He's alive and He's present and He's with us. And the event that I hang my relationship with Christ on, it wasn't baptism, and it wasn't even the profession of faith that I had made. It was a Thursday night as I sat in Vaughn Regional Medical Center in Selma, Alabama. My dad have been in and out of hospitals for a while, for the past few months. Actually, I recall the doctors pulling my mom aside and saying, hey, you need to prepare for the worst. It's not looking. But this one Thursday evening, I recall sitting in this cold hospital room with my dad. And I remember him telling my mom, he said, hey, Rena, I'm not feeling too well. And my mom left along with my grandpa, who was there to go and gather the doctor or nurse or whoever she could find. And that left me sitting in the hospital room with just my dad. And as I sat there, watching him kind of suffer, the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, hey, place your hand on your dad's forehead and pray for him. Now I was thinking, whoa. I know how to say grace before I lay me down to sleep. Pray the Lord my soul to keep. But this was way out of my league. So all these prayers that I had prayed, nothing compared to what I felt the Holy Spirit was asking me to do in that moment. But Lord, I'm no saint. I'm no prophet or prophetess. Like, I'm not even that important of a person. I'm not that special of a person. But please don't take my dad. Like, I need my dad. As a 16-year-old kid, I knew that I needed my dad. Mom came back into the room with the nurses and, hey, Andre, how are you feeling? And I'll never forget, my dad sat straight up in bed because he had been lying a certain way to help him breathe. He sat straight up in bed and he said, you know, Rena, I don't know, but I believe I feel all right. The moment for me was the turning point. That was when I realized, like, oh man, like, he's really real. For a minute, I would think like, oh, it wasn't my prayer that did that. But after that, I believed in the power of prayer. And I knew that God was real and he was present, and weight was lifted off my shoulders. And as I can remember, for the first time in possibly weeks, I slept through the night, encounter with the true and living God. And I was like, I knew I owed my life to him. I didn't know how that would look, but I knew I owed my life to him. And since then, I've had this overwhelming desire to show people, especially teens and young adults, that we have a Father who can meet us right where we are and who is fully able to relate to us at every stage of our lives. So like every teenager, life kept rolling on, and a year later, I found myself taking senior pictures, getting ready to graduate, thinking about colleges, 4-inch thick white binder notebook kind of thing. And it was filled with scholarship applications, recommendations letters, acceptance letters, the whole nine. And I finally settled on the University of Alabama, Roll Tide Roll. And I had no idea what I wanted to do there. I just knew that it was the cool place to be. And I was Bama bound. I met my roommates. Everything was all picked out for my dorm. And then the unexpected happened. So now I want to transition into chapters 18 to 21. And I titled this, The Rebel of Midnight Closets. A miniature heart attack that happens when you like miss a step and you're like, that's kind of what it felt like the moment I realized that I wouldn't be able to attend the university of my dreams. Though I had all these random scholarships, I still wouldn't be able to attend because I didn't have enough money to cover it. And you know, maybe this is just the way the cookie crumbled. I was devastated, y'all. I stayed in my room like forever. I cried for days. That was until my mom talked me into accompanying her to take my oldest brother to register for classes at the local community college. Reluctantly, I went. And while I was there, she encouraged, she was like, hey, Tori, just give it a shot. And I had taken some dual enrollment classes, so I was like, it's not that big of a transition. I signed up for the next semester, for that semester that I was supposed to be at the University of Alabama. It was hard for me, not coursework wise, but I felt like a failure. I was, you know, that girl, and how would it look me being at the local community college? You know, what all my friends would say, and for a minute I felt like God was out to get me. Graduated within a year, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I had this guidance counselor talk me into nursing school, and I was like, I didn't want to do it, but it seemed logical. You don't have anything else to do, why not go to nursing school? A year left before I become a registered nurse in the state of Alabama, and I dropped it all. I shocked my friends, my family, my professors, and especially my parents. I dropped it all. As I was sitting in class one day, it was the same voice that spoke to me and told me to pray for my dad, spoke to me and told me, hey, if you don't want to be here, get up and go. I've got you. I'm like, me? Because I really didn't want to be, y'all, I hated nursing. I hated IV lines. I hated clinicals. I hated my stethoscope. I hated everything about it. Shout out to every nurse out there, because that is a calling from the Lord. I continued to work part-time at a local restaurant, but while I was there, I was like, I gotta make a move. I can't stay here. I just follow my heart, which was always rooted in music. So I decided to pack up my Camry, move to Atlanta. My 19, 20-year-old mind, I'll become a singing sensation overnight. It's supposed to happen overnight, right? Wrong. It was pure hell. The first week that I was in Atlanta, I cried every day. Called my mom sometimes 5-6 times a day, like, hey, I'm coming home. This is not for me. At the time, I lived with my uncle. Stayed there long because I didn't feel very welcome. not by him, but other circumstances. Just as I contemplated, really considered packing up and going back home, the ram sort of rattled in the bush. Turns out across town, I had a distant aunt that my mom was very close with, and my mom had told her about the situation, and she called me that day. Move in tonight if you want to. You are welcome here. My home is open. Y'all, the next day, that Camry was up 285 and I was gone. And I moved to the other side of town with my aunt, and that kind of began the transition of a lifetime as well. This aunt was in her mid-40s, had no children, and at the time was in the middle of just this terrible kind of divorce situation. But she had recently decided to return to school to pursue a master's degree. And other than my mom, she was one of the sweetest souls that I had ever met. She took me in as her own. I never felt like I didn't belong. And in a way, I felt like the daughter that she didn't have. Within 2 days of being in her house, I found a job because I went in just to look around. Turns out the manager that was on duty was from my hometown. We ended up talking. He went to the same schools and graduated the same schools that I did. I told him I was looking for a job. He hired me on the spot, told me to come back Monday. It was crazy. But though things were looking up, there was still something missing. I knew that there was so much more that I can give other than going to work and selling suits every day. And I began to go through a period of this tough depression and just not feeling like myself. I avoided friends and family and anybody that I thought would ask me about anything about my life. There were days that I would literally sit in my closet in the dark and cry, just hoping that the days would run together. But I knew I had to get out of that. So I removed myself from all forms of social media. I began to pray like never before. Fasting and meditation became these spiritual disciplines that I never really was introduced to back home in my small Baptist church. I began to look for a purpose in life that up until then I didn't know I had. I've changed drastically. Studying the Bible became a habit, and books and commentaries just began to pile up in that closet that I had once cried in. At this point, I was still very anti-college. I felt like a waste of time. After all, I had did all this stuff for college and I didn't have anything to show for it. All these nursing classes, all this stuff, and nothing to show for it. My aunt would often bring up the topic over dinner subtly, and I would always reply with a definite no. Never going back to college is not for me. So I stayed there for like 2.5 years, and I decided to kind of gently get her off my back. So I got accepted to Georgia State University's public policy program. I didn't even know what that was. It just sounded really good to tell people about. I didn't really want to do it. At the end of the day, it was really just for validation. You were somebody if you had a college degree. After numerous trips to the admissions office, when I tell you everything that could go wrong went wrong, I had issues that I'd never had before. And looking back, I realized it was just God protecting me. My last trip down to the admissions office, I sat in my car and I cried. Snotty nose, teary eyes. It was a mess, and I finally threw up my hands and I said, okay, God, you win. What is it that you want me to do? 2 days later, I found myself in the parking lot of Planet Fitness because all I did was go to work, church, and the gym. And I was in the parking lot of Planet Fitness, and the same voice that told me to place my hand on my dad's head and pray for him, the same voice that told me, hey, if you don't want to be here in this nursing stuff, get up and go. I've got you. That same voice spoke to me and said, call Sanford University. I had never heard of Sanford, grew up in Alabama my whole life. Sanford was not on my radar. So I called Sanford, and the conversation literally went something along the lines of, hi, my name is Victoria. This is going to sound real strange, but I'm supposed to be at Sanford. And the transfer admissions guy, Elliot, laughed, and he was like, okay. So we got the ball rolling, and things began to move, and I just found myself in this totally different place in life. And like I said, Sanford was never on my radar, and God has a way of showing me things full circle. As a matter of fact, just a year ago, I was at my parents' house, and remember that 4-inch thick white notebook with all that college stuff in it? It had a page on Sanford. In the very back of that notebook, there was a little 4x10 note card from Sanford, and it said, Sanford University, your story begins here. I couldn't afford a place like Sanford, private institution, but I've seen God move through that process. Scholarships showed up. I don't know how it was paid for. It was paid for. They gave me my diploma, my degree, so it got paid for. I was accepted into scholarship programs that I didn't apply for, that I didn't even qualify for. So I saw God move in that time, that note card was a full circle moment from that 18-year-old girl just trying to find a place to fit in life to now being a 25-year-old woman and making sure that wherever I am is where I belong. 25 until the next time I have to write a spiritual autobiography. So to be continued, and I've titled this A Life Lived in Pieces. So one of the quotes that I live by is from Pastor Stephen Furtick, who says that potential is realized in pieces, provision is released in pieces, and purpose is revealed in pieces. Potential is realized in pieces, provision is released in pieces, and purpose is revealed in pieces. Culturally, I often feel out of pocket with my career path. I'm an African-American woman who grew up in a town where pastors, at one point my own, wouldn't even allow me near a pulpit. Many of my family and friends don't have a clue as to why I'm in seminary. Sometimes I ask the same questions. Y'all, I'm doing what I can. And however, as I reflect on my calling in my life, I can see how my life has been changed through the encounters that I've had with God and how I felt his presence, and I feel his call to this place. There were times that I felt God's presence just as I would feel the winds on my face. Then again, there were times, like I said, I would sit in that dark closet and just beg God, just say something, anything. What is it you want me to do? Just give me something, anything. As I mentioned before, I'm convinced that God works in seasons. At every stage of my life, I've kicked and screamed and begged God, please, please, please show me what's next, or at least give me the point of this current situation. Like, what's the purpose of it? What's the point? Give me something. And in every instance, he's replied with the same subtle response, and that is, my grace is sufficient. I began to see the interconnectedness of it all. And I think about perhaps that season of sickness for my dad was to teach me to pray. Maybe nursing school was to teach me to trust him even when I didn't understand him. Maybe things didn't work out at my uncle's house so that I could get across town and get with my aunt and be influenced. And I thought that God had buried me in that closet that I was sitting crying, but turns out he had planted me so that I could find roots in a greater purpose, which was ultimately roots in him. And though I felt behind, as society would put it, I was 22 when I started at Sanford. I felt so behind, felt so old living in a dorm. Was like, you too old to be in here, go home. Looking back, I realized that I was exactly where I needed to be when I needed to be there. Sanford was the place that encouraged and affirmed the call that I felt for so long. It was one of my preaching professors who encouraged me to, he was like, maybe you should think about seminary. I was like, me? Seminary? What? He was the person that encouraged me and told me how much potential I had and gave me opportunities to develop that potential. So I'm grateful for that. It was all of these experiences that ultimately led me to McAfee. And even as I sit through classes there sometimes, I find myself again begging God, what's next? What are you doing? As we register for classes and they're like, what track are you going to take? What are you going to do after this?
I'm like, okay, God, they asking questions. You got to move. You got to tell me something because they asking questions. I need something.
And he subtly responds again with the same response. My grace is sufficient. And those seasons seem so arbitrary until you realize that they all kind of work together. And that realization usually doesn't come in the midst of those seasons. It comes after you get on the outside of it. I don't have an exact address as to where I'm going, but I know beyond shadows of doubt that I am on the right road. And you know what? Maybe this life in pieces is God's sustaining grace for the journey. So, grace and peace. Bye.
This is what we declare.